Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and I hope my sound is working, so just let me know if there's any problems with the balance. Let's open with a little poem and then I'll explain what we're doing today. Oh ho, have you seen the Frost King a-marching up the hill? His hoary face is stern and pale, his touch is icy chill. He sends the birdlings to the south, he bids the brooks be still. Yet not in wrath or cruelty he marches up the hill. He will often rest at noontime to see the sunbeams play, and flash his spears of icicles, or let them melt away. He'll toss the snowflakes in the air, nor let them go nor stay. Then hold his breath while swift they fall, that coasting boys may play. He'll touch the brooks and rivers wide, that skating crowds may shout. He'll make the people far and near remember he's about. He'll send his nimble frosty jack without a shade of doubt, to do all kinds of merry pranks and call the children out. He'll sit upon the whitened fields and reach his icy hand, o'er houses where the sudden cold folks cannot understand. The very moon that ventures forth from clouds so soft and grand will stare to see the stiffened look that settles over the land. And so the Frost King o'er the hills and o'er the startled plain will come and go from year to year, till earth grows young again, till time himself shall cease to be, till gone are hill and plain. Whenever winter comes to say, stay, the hoary king shall reign. What we're reading about tonight is winter. Now, obviously, winter has an association to a very specific holiday. But I've been told that I need to wait a little bit before I start talking about said holiday. So this is my workaround. We're going to talk about winter, and in particular, we're going to talk of early winter. So we're going to get a couple of shorter stories here tonight, all from the same basic book called the Pearl Storybook. Stories and Legends of Winter, Christmas, and New Year's Day. It's written by a few people, and it includes selections from several people. And basically, it is a collection of short stories about winter, obviously that holiday that I shall not name yet, New Year's Day, and midwinter, and the joining to summer, or spring rather. And that poem there was by Mary Mapes Dodge, just a poet. It's called The Frost King. So we're going to just read a couple of short stories from it about winter and sort of think about the coming of winter. Hello, Suki. Hello, GS. GS said, pretty scene, clear tonight. So the first story that we're going to read is called King Frost. There's a lot of like King Frost and King Winter titles in here, but they're all different. In King Winter by Margaret T. Canby. The story does have some historical note in that Helen Keller wrote a very similar version of the story to Margaret T. Canby, and there was a huge controversy that she had ripped it off and it was being passed off, or whether her, people she worked with were doing that, or whether it was just sort of forgotten memories. But we're reading from Canby's version, which is the version that presumably Helen Keller would have heard if she did indeed hear it. That was a part of the controversy. So, King Frost and King Winter by Margaret T. Canby. King Winter lives in a very strong palace near the cold North Pole. It is built of great blocks of thick ice, and all around it stand high, pointed icebergs. And white bears keep guard at the gate. He has many little fairy servants to do his bidding, and they are like their master, cross and spiteful, and seldom do any kind actions, so that few are found who love them. King Winter is rich and powerful, but he keeps all his wealth so tightly locked up that it does no one any good. And what is worse, he often tries to get the treasures of other persons, to add to the store in his money chests. One day, when this selfish old king was walking through the woods, he saw the leaves thickly covered with gold and precious stones, which had been spread upon them by King Frost, to make the trees more beautiful and give pleasure to all who saw them. But looking at them did not satisfy King Winter. He wanted to have the gold for his own, and he made up his mind to get it. Somehow. Back he went to his palace to call his servants home to do this new work. As soon as he reached the gate, he blew a loud, shrill note on his horn, and in a few minutes his odd little fairies came flying in at the windows and doors and stood before him, quietly waiting their commands. The king ordered some to go out into the forest at nightfall, armed with canes and clubs, and beat off all the gold and ruby leaves. And he told the others to take strong bags and gather up all the treasure and bring it to him. If that silly King Frost does not think any more of gold and precious stones than to waste them on trees, I shall teach him better, said the old king. The fairies promised to obey him, and as soon as night came, off they rushed to the forest. And a terrible noise they made, flying from one beautiful tree to another, banging and beating the leaves off. Branches were cracking and falling on all sides, and leaves were flying about, while the sound of shouting and laughing and screaming told all who heard it that the spiteful winter fairies were at some mischief. The other fairies followed, gathered up the poor shattered leaves, crammed them into great bags they had brought, and taking them to King Winter's palace as fast as they were filled. The work was kept up nearly all night when morning came. The magic forest of many-colored leaves was changed into a dreary place. Bare trees stretched their long brown branches around and seemed to shiver in the cold wind, and to sigh for the beautiful dress of shining leaves so rudely torn from them. King Winter was very much pleased, as one great sack after another was tugged in by the fairies. And when morning came, he called his servants together and said, "You have all worked hard and well, my fairies, and have saved much treasure from being wasted. I will now open these bags and show you the gold, and each of you shall have a share." The king took up the sack nearest to him. Their surprise, when out rushed a great heap of brown leaves, which flew all over the floor and half choked them with dust. When the king saw this, he growled with rage and looked at the fairies with a dark frown on his face. They begged him to look at the next sack, but when he did so, it, too, was full of brown leaves instead of gold and precious stones. This was too much for King Winter's patience. He tossed the bags one by one out of the palace window, and would have tossed the unlucky fairies after them had not some of the bravest ones knelt down and asked for mercy, telling him they had obeyed his orders, and if King Frost had taken back his treasure, they were not to blame. This turned their master's anger against King Frost, and very angry and fierce he was. He gnashed his great teeth with rage, rushed up and down in his palace until it shook again. At last he made up his mind to go out that night, break down King Frost's beautiful palace, and take away all of his riches. When night came, he started out with all his fairies. Some were armed with the clubs they'd beaten off the leaves with, and others had lumps of ice to throw at their enemy, but the king had been so angry all day that he had not told them what to do. Also, he had left their sharp spears locked up. He wrapped himself in his great white cloak of swan's down in order that he might look very grand, and so they went their way. King Frost lived on the other side of the wood, and he had heard all the noise made by the winter fairies in spoiling the trees, and had seen the next morning the mischief they had done. It made him very sorry to find the beautiful leaves all knocked off and taken away, and he determined to punish King Winter by going to attack his palace that night. He spent the day making ready and dressing himself and his servants in shining coats of ice armor, and giving each one several spears and darts of ice tipped with sharp diamond points that looked like brave little soldiers. They looked like brave little soldiers. The two groups of fairies met in the midst of the great wood. After some words between the kings, their servants fell to blows, and a great battle they had. The winter fairies fought with their clubs and threw lumps of ice at the frost fairies, but their clubs were weak from being used so roughly the night before and soon broke. And when their ice balls were all thrown away, they could find no more. But King Frost had armed his servants well, and they threw their icy darts among the winter fairies. The trees, too, seemed to fight on the Frost King's side. The bare twigs pulled their hair, and the branches ripped their ice clothes wherever they could. So the winter fairies had the worst of it, and at last started off at full speed and rushed through the woods, never stopping till they reached the palace, and shut themselves in, leaving their king, who was too proud to run, all alone with King Frost and his fairies. You may be sure they were not very merciful to him. They began to pull his cloak, calling out, "Give us your cloak, to keep our trees warm. You stole their pretty leaves, you must give us your cloak." Now this was a magic cloak, and had been given to King Winter by the Queen of the Fairies. So when he felt them pulling at it, he wrapped it tightly about him and began to run. After him flew the frost fairies, pulling and plucking at his great white cloak, snatching out a bit here and a bit there, and laughing and shouting while King Winter howled and roared and rushed along, not knowing where he went. On they flew up and down the wood, in and out among the trees, their way marked by the scattered bits of white down from King Winter's cloak. When day began, King Winter found himself near his own palace. He dashed his tattered cloak to the ground and rushed through the gate, shaking his fist at King Frost. He and his fairies took the cloak, and as they went home through the woods, they hung beautiful wreaths of white down upon all the trees, and also trimmed the branches with their broken spears and darts, which shone like silver in the sunlight, and made the woods look as bright, almost, as before it had been robbed of its golden and ruby leaves. Even the ground was covered with shining darts and white feathers. Everyone thought it very beautiful, and no one could tell how it happened. And that is the story of the Frost King, King Frost and King Winter. Like I said, they're going to be shorter stories here today. I'm a big sucker for stuff that explains natural phenomenon in a narrative way, and that's what that does. So it's a delight to me. But let me know what you think about it, and if you're watching this later, let me know in the comments what you think of it. I read the comments as well when they come through. Our next one we're going to read is called The Snow Maiden, which apparently is a Russian legend. I don't know how exactly thorough this book is, so take all of that with a grain of salt. GS says very beautiful. Of course, if you weren't quite, you're not the type of person to put things, metaphorical things together. Obviously, the down is snow from the cloak of the King Winter, and the icicles are the spear points that King Frost had given his army. And basically, because he stole the leaves of fall from the trees in the blustery winds of winter, they took his coat and laid it across the trees. Okay. The Snow Maiden is a Russian legend. I could not find much more about this other than it's in this book. Might not even be Russian. Hard to say, but it's a nice story. Also, I had to read it because it basically... Well, you'll see. There's a familiar character name in it. Once upon a time, there lived a peasant named Ivan and his wife, Marie. They were very sad because they had no children. One cold winter day, the peasant and his wife sat near a window in their cottage and watched the village children playing in the snow. The little ones were busily at work making a beautiful snow maiden. Ivan turned to his wife and said, "What a good time the children are having. See, they are making a beautiful snow maiden. Come, let us go into the garden and amuse ourselves in the same way. We will make a pretty little snow image." They went into the garden which lay back of their cottage. "My husband," said Marie, "we have no children. What do you say to us making for ourselves a child of snow?" "A very good idea," said the husband, and he at once began to mold the form of a little body with tiny feet and hands. His wife made a small head and set it upon the shoulders of the snow image. By the way, just as a pause here, if you're confused by what the heck is a snow image, a snow image appears to be like a snowman, obviously, but it seems to be just any kind of building of snow. An image out of snow. It can be flat on the ground or not. I know this from reading stories that we're not going to read here, but that use the same language. But you can, in this context, look at it as sort of like what we would call a snowman. A man who passed by the garden stopped for a moment and looked at the peasants who were so strangely occupied. After a moment's silence, he said to them, "May God help you." "Thank you," said Ivan. "God's blessing indeed is always good," nodded Marie. "What are you making?" asked the stranger. Ivan looked up and said, "We are making a little snow maiden." Then he went on with his work, forming the nose, chin, and eyes. In a few moments, the snow child was finished, and Ivan looked at her in great admiration. Suddenly he noticed that the mouth and eyes opened, the cheeks and lips took on a rosy hue, and in a few moments the astonished peasant saw standing before him a living child. "Who are you?" he asked, filled with wonder at seeing a little girl instead of a snow image. "I am Snow White, your little daughter," said the child. Then she threw her arms lovingly around the man and his wife, who both began to cry for joy. The delighted parents took Snow White into the cottage, and before long the news ran through the village that a little daughter had come to live with Ivan and Marie. Of course, the village children came to play with Snow White. She was such a charming little girl, with a very white skin, eyes as blue as the sky, and lovely golden hair. To be sure, her cheeks were not so rosy as those of her companions, but she was so bright and gentle that everyone loved her very much indeed. The winter passed very quickly, and Snow White grew so fast that by the time the trees were veiled in the green buds of spring, she was as tall as a girl of 12 or 13 years. During the winter months, the Snow Maiden had been very joyous and happy, but when the mild, warm days of spring came, she seemed sad and low-spirited. Her mother, Marie, noticed the change and said to her, "My dear little girl, why are you sad? Tell me, are you ill?" "No, mother, dear, I am not ill," said Snow White. But she no longer seemed to enjoy playing out of doors with the other children. She stayed very quietly in the cottage. One lovely spring day, the village children came to the cottage and called out, "Come, Snow White, come! We are going into the woods to gather wildflowers. Come with us." "Yes, do go, my dear," said Mother Marie. "Go with your little friends and gather spring flowers. I'm sure you'll enjoy the outing." Away went the happy children to the woods. They gathered the lovely wildflowers and made them into bouquets and coronets. And when the afternoon sun began to sink in the western sky, they built a big bonfire. Gaily they sang little songs, merrily dancing around the bright, crackling blaze. "Let each one dance alone," called out one of the little girls. "Snow White, watch us for a little while, and then you too will know how to dance alone." Away whirled the happy little children, dancing freely around and round the bonfire. In a little while Snow White joined them. When the gay little people were out of breath and the dancing grew slower and slower, someone called out, "Where is Snow White?" "Snow White, where are you?" shouted the other children, but nowhere could they find their little companion. They ran home and told Ivan and Marie that Snow White had disappeared while dancing round the bonfire. The villagers made a thorough search for the little maiden, but they never found her. For while she was dancing round the bonfire, she had slowly changed into a little white vapor and had flown away toward the sky, where she changed into a delicate snowflake. I think that's supposed to be a happy ending. I don't know if it is. A little more melancholy. That is the Snow Maiden by someone. It doesn't tell me. It's a Russian legend, apparently. All right. As I said, it's just basically a lot of little short stories that I really enjoyed. So if you're watching this later, in the description below, there's going to be, as I usually do, sometimes I'm a little late on it, but time codes you can click on to jump to certain stories. Just Fleece It Out says, interesting, maybe a happy ending? Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what the story is really trying to do. If the story is trying to be a metaphor for seasons, then yeah, of course it's a happy ending, because it's about how, these spirits of seasons just cycle through. It could very easily, in that sense, without really deviating from that point, also be pulling on a kind of pagan understanding of the world as one that exists in cycles. Now, admittedly, there's a lot of variety in this, so I'm being very general, both with pagans and Christians here, but, Christianity has this general view that there's kind of a long narrative of history, and we're heading towards a certain ending. It's more like a traditional story. But when you look at things like pagan conceptions of the world, it's seasonal, it's cyclical. Death and life are connected, and, rot and growth are connected, and, there's all that kind of stuff, and it could just be an echo of that understanding of the world, where you have this child that you love, and then they pass, and maybe in a sort of metaphorical or metaphysical sense, anyways, their spirit comes back in another way, another time. It's hard to say. I don't know what the intention was, and I don't know if that's a fair interpretation of it, but I do think it's interesting. Anyways, sheltering wings. In case you felt, which admittedly, for a show that talks about fairy tales, if you felt like maybe there hadn't been enough birds that had died recently in fairy tales, because there's always birds dying in fairy tales. For some reason, that's like the favorite thing. Some birds are going to die in this. It's kind of the whole point of the story. Just Fleece It Out says, unless it's some kind of thought that she enjoyed her life and to seize the day. I think that's fair as well. Enjoying things while you can, and she was able to, so moving on into vapor and being reborn was the best outcome. I think it's also just don't be scared of the end of your life to the extent that you don't leave the house. I think that's a fair point as well. I think that's kind of the point you're making. I'm just sort of reiterating it. That, you know, just Fleece It Out says YouTube stream lag, basically what you just said. No, I think actually you've developed a slightly different point there, which I think is true. I think that I think there is a sense of, you can take it as melancholy, but also like the highest point of joy was the moment that took her away, and she was afraid of it because she knew it would, obviously, but so was life, you know. As a person who does rock climbing, that's a thought you have to have a few times. You're like, well, man, I'll just turn into a snowflake, I guess. All right. Sheltering wings, in case you felt like there wasn't enough bird death on this channel. It was intensely cold. Heavy sleds creaked as they scraped over the jeweled sounding board of dry, unyielding snow. The signs above shops... Can I just say, sorry to break the flow here, because this is all different writers, you can really notice it. I don't know if other people do, but like just that opening line is so much more developed and rich than the previous prose. Like, I like the previous story, that's why I read it, but the prose here is so strong. The signs above shop doors shrieked and groaned as they swung helplessly to and fro, and the clear, keen air seemed frozen into sharp little crystalline needles that stabbed every little living thing that must be out in it. The streets were almost forsaken in mid-afternoon. Businessmen hurried from shelter to shelter. Every dog remained at home. Not a bird was to be seen or heard. The sparrows had been forced to hide themselves in crevices and holes. The doves have found protected corners, huddled together as best they could. Many birds were frozen to death. It's just the favorite thing in fairy tales. It's like yet another frozen to death bird. A dozen or more doves were gathered close under the cornice of the piazza of a certain house. I know I'm saying that wrong, but I know how to say it, but for some reason my brain's not working. Trying with little success to keep warm. Some small sparrows, disturbed and driven from the cozy place they had chosen, saw the doves and came flying across the piazza. "Dear doves," chirped the sparrows, "won't you let us nestle near you? Your bodies look so large and warm. But your coats are frosted with cold. We cannot let you come near us, for we are almost frozen now," murmured the doves sadly. "But we are perishing." "So are we." "It looks so warm near your broad wings, gentle doves. Oh, let us come. We are so little and so very, very cold." "Come," cooed a dove at last, and a trembling little sparrow fluttered close and nestled under the broad white wing. "Come," cooed another dove, and another little sparrow found comfort. "Come, come," echoed another warm-hearted bird, and another, until at last more than half the doves were sheltering small, quivering sparrows beneath their own half-frozen wings. "My sisters, you are very foolish," said the other doves. "You mean well, but Why do you risk your own beautiful lives to give life to worthless sparrows?"
"Ah, they were so small and so very cold," murmured the doves. "Many of us will perish this cruel night, and while we have life, let us share its meager warmth with those in bitter need."
Colder and colder grew the day. The sun went down behind the clouds. Sorry. Got a weird message. Colder and colder grew the day. The sun went down behind the clouds, suffused with soft and radiant beauty, but more fiercely and relentlessly swept the wind around the house where the doves and sparrows waited for death. An hour after sunset, a man came up to the house and strode across the piazza. As the door of the house closed heavily behind him, a little child watching from the window saw something jarred from the cornice fall heavily to the piazza floor.
"Oh, Papa," she cried in surprise, "a poor frozen dove has fallen on our porch."
When he stepped out to pick up the fallen dove, the father saw the others under the cornice. They were no longer able to move or to utter a cry, so he brought them in and placed them in a room where they might slowly revive. Soon more than half the doves could coo gratefully. They raised their stiffened wings, then out from beneath the wing of each revived dove fluttered a living sparrow.
"Look, Papa," cried the child. "Each dove that has come to life was holding a poor little sparrow close to her heart."
They gently raised the wings of the doves that could not be revived. Not one had a sparrow beneath it. Colder and fiercer swept the wind without, cutting and more piercing grew the frozen, crystalline needles of air, but each dove that had sheltered a frost-coated sparrow beneath her own shivering wings lived to rejoice in the glowing, gladsome sunshine of the days to come. It's one of the shorter ones. But like I said, bird death. Fairy tales just love their dead birds. All right. Which brings us into a couple about trees, which I find interesting. So the next one is actually another poem. The reason I'm reading these poems, even though I don't normally read poems on this channel, is I feel like these poems are not as abstract and difficult for people. Because there are poems that I really like, but I think you kind of need a course on them to really get anything out of them, which is not supposed to be the case with poetry, but some poetry is so much that way. Gia says, that's very touching. Yes, I agree. I found it actually, I know it's kind of saccharine, but the fact of the matter is that huddling together would have given them more warmth. So because it was realistic that they were better together than apart, and it was such like it wasn't stretching it, that was accurate. Somehow that made it much better for me. So this is a poem that doesn't require like a Bachelor of Arts degree or classics literature knowledge or whatever, the way so many poems do. This is called The Fable of the Three Elms. The north wind spoke to three sturdy elms, and "Now you are dead," said he. "I have blown a blast till the snow whirled past and withered your leaves and see. You are brown and old, and your boughs are cold." And he sneered at the elm trees three. The first elm spoke in a hollow tone, for the snow lay deep and white. "You think we are dead, North Wind," he said. "Why, we sleep as you sleep at night. Beneath the snow lie my sturdy roots. They grip on the friendly earth, and I rest till another year," said he, and he shook with a noisy mirth. The second elm laughed a hearty laugh, And north wind, he cried in glee, beneath my bark glows a living spark, the sap of a healthy tree. My boughs are bare and my leaves are gone, but what have I to fear? For the winter time is my time of rest, and I sleep till another year. The third elm spoke, and his voice was sweet, and kind as the summery sea. O wind, he said, we are far from spring. The God in whose hand we be looks down with love from the winter sky and sends us his sun to cheer. If we had no snow, there'd be no spring. We rest till another year. The three elms rocked in the stinging blast and under the heavy snow. Their roots were warm from the raging storm and safe from the winds that blow. They smiled in their hearts, and their leafless boughs spread over the frosty way, for they knew that the God of forest trees would watch through each winter day. The north wind uttered a frosty sigh as the snow blew far and free, and his weary eyes sought the winter skies. And mighty is God, said he, to die or live are his gifts to give. And he smiled at the elm trees three. That's Margaret E. Sangster Jr., which is one great name, let me tell you. You'll see that, actually, if you were looking at that. The next page was a Japanese tale. I don't know how to put this, but I don't want an American author's take from 1856 or whatever when this book came out on Japanese tales. God help us if that was the case. Okay. So the next one is called The Pine and the Flax. There's kind of a theme of trees here. And if you prefer when I read sort of one big long story and you haven't really watched a lot of these before, we'll definitely still be doing that. No, don't sweat it. Just try different things all the time. This one is called The Pine and the Flax, and if you don't only know flax for its seed, flax is a plant. I'll leave it to you to Google if you don't know it. And of course, a pine tree. This is by Albrekt. Segerstedt? My apologies to the long dead, but nonetheless honorable and talented Albrekt for ruining his name. Just where a forest ended grew a pine tree taller and more beautiful than all the others in the forest. Far away could be seen its feathery round crown, whose soft branches waved so gracefully when the wind blew across the plain. At the foot of the pine tree the fields of grain began. Here the farmers sowed seeds of many kinds, but the flax was sowed nearest the pine. It came up beautiful and the pine thought a great deal of this slender green thing. The flax stalk raised itself higher and higher, and near the close of summer it bore a little blue helmet on its head. "Thou art so beautiful," said the tall pine. The flax bowed itself low, but raised again so gracefully that it looked like a billowy sea. The pine and the flax often talked to each other and became great friends. "What folly," said the other trees to the pine. "Do not have anything to do with the flax. It is so weak. Choose the tall spruce or the birch tree. They are very strong." But the pine would not desert the flax. The thistle and other small plants talked to the flax. "You are crazy to think of the lofty pine. It doesn't trouble itself about you. It is tall and proud. Children of a size play best together. Think of the bush and vine and content yourself." "I shall trust the pine," replied the flax. "It is honorable and faithful, and I am fond of it." So the pine and the flax remained friends. Time passed and the flax was pulled up and made into ropes and cloth. The pine was felled and its trunk carried to the city. But the pine and flax did not forget each other, though neither knew where the other was. A large, beautiful ship was launched upon the water. On this the pine tree was erected as a mast, and on the highest part waved a flag. Then came a great white sail that helped the mast carry the proud ship forward. It wrapped itself around the mast, spread itself out like a great wing, and caught the wind on its wide curve. The sail had been woven of linen that grew as flax out in the field on the edge of the wood, and the two friends had met again. Clasping each other faithfully, out over the foaming billows they went to new lands. It was life. It was pleasure to go on united as friends. The winds took a message back to the forest. Who would have believed it, said the spruce and the birch. There's a nice little short one. Try not to think too much about the fact that chopping a tree down kills it, and just enjoy what is there and is very beautiful metaphorically. This one will probably be our last. I'll recheck the list to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, but I think this will be our last one. And now I get to tell you, I mean, this is apparently a Norwegian legend. Again, I couldn't find much about it, but that's what this one book says. But I learned something today when I was looking around for this. Bruin, as in the Boston Bruins, this hockey team. That same term, Bruin, means brown bear. It's a Dutch word, I think it is, or Danish or something like that. Nordic anyways, word for a brown bear. So they're talking about a brown bear here, and it's why Bruin, or a brown bear, has a stumpy tail, because you know how they have those little small nubs of tails. Once upon a time, a sly fox lived in a deep forest which bordered a river. One fine winter day, he was lying in the sun near a brush heap with his eyes closed, and he was thinking, "It has been several days since I had a dainty supper. How should I enjoy a fine large fish this evening? I'll slip over to the edge of the forest and watch the fishermen as they go home with their day's catch. Perhaps good luck will do something for me." Now, one old man had caught a very fine lot of fish of all sizes. Indeed, he had so many that he was obliged to hire a cart in which to carry them home. He was driving along slowly when suddenly he noticed a red fox crouched under the bush near the road. He stopped his horse, jumped down from the cart, and carefully crept near the spot where he'd seen Master Reynard. The fox did not open his eyes nor move a muscle. "Well," said the old fisherman, "I do believe he's dead. What a fine coat he has. I will take him home and give him to my wife for a present." He lifted the fox and put him into the cart among the fish. The old man then mounted to his seat and drove merrily on, thinking how pleased his wife would be with the fine fish and the fox. When they were well on their way, the sly fox threw one fish after another out of the cart until all lay scattered along the road. Then he slipped out of the cart. When the old man reached his cottage, he called out to his wife, "Come and see the fine fish I caught today, and I've brought you a beautiful gift also." His wife hurried to the cart and said, "Where are the fish, my husband, and where's my present?" "Why, it's there in the cart," he replied. "In the cart?" exclaimed his wife. "Why, there's nothing here, neither fish nor presents, so far as I can see." The old man looked, and to his great surprise and disappointment, he discovered that what his wife said was true.
Meanwhile, the sly fox had gathered up fish and had taken them to the forest in order to enjoy a fine supper. Presently he heard a pleasant voice saying, "Good evening, Brother Renard." He looked up and saw his friend Bruin, again meaning Brown Bear. There we are. It was a song I thought was more fitting. "Oh, good evening to you," answered the fox. "I have been fishing today, and as you see, luck certainly attended me." "It did indeed," answered the bear. "Could you not spare me one fish? I should consider it the gift a great favor." "Oh," answered the fox, "why don't you go fishing yourself? I assure you, when one becomes a fisherman, he thoroughly enjoys the fruits of his patience." "Go fishing, my friend," said Bruin in astonishment. "That is impossible. I know nothing about catching fish, I assure you." "Pooh! It is very easy, especially in the winter-time when ice nearly covers the river. Let me tell you what to do. Make a hole in the ice and stick your tail down into it. Hold it there just as long as you can and keep saying, 'Come, little fish, come, big fish.' Don't mind if the tail smarts a little. That only means that you have a bite. And I assure you, the longer you hold it there, the more fish you will catch. Then all at once, out with your tail. Give it a strong pull sideways, then upwards, and you'll have enough fish to last you several days. But mind you, follow my directions closely." "Oh, my friend, I'm very grateful for your kind information," said Bruin, and off he went to the river, where he proceeded to follow Master Fox's directions. In the short time, sly Renard passed by, and when he saw Bruin patiently sitting on the ice with his tail in a hole, he laughed until his sides ached. He said wickedly under his breath, "A clear sky, a clear sky. Bruin's tail will freeze, Bruin's tail will freeze." "What did you say, my dear friend?" asked the bear. "Oh, I was making a wish," replied the fox. All night long, Bruin sat there, fishing patiently with his tail. Then he decided to go home. How very heavy his tail felt. He thought to himself that all the fish in the river must be fastened there. In a little while, the women of the village came to get water from the river, and they saw the bear. And they called out at the top of their voices, "Come, come, a bear! Kill him, kill him!" The men came quickly with great sticks in their hand. Poor Bruin gave a short pull sideways, and his tail snapped off short. He made it off to the woods as fast as he could go, but to this day he goes about with a stumpy tail. And that is how the Bruin got its short tail. Now I'm just going to take a moment and make sure I'm not forgetting with something here. Nope, I think that's all I meant to show. So let's close with a little poem called The Fir Tree. O singing wind, searching field and wood, canst thou find aught that's sweet or good? Flowers to kiss awake, or dewy grass to shake, or feathered seed aloft to speed? Replies the wind, I cannot find flowers to kiss awake, or dewy grass to shake, or feathered seed aloft to speed. Yet I meet something sweet when the scented fir, balsam-breathing fir, in my flight I stir. By Edith M. Thomas. Well, thank you so much for everybody coming by. My name is Rory. GS says, those sly little foxes, great selection tonight, Rory. Well, thank you so much, GS, and thank you for coming by. Justly Sit Out, Suki, GS, and whoever else is hiding off in the branches. By the way, just in case you're watching this and you've watched this for a while and YouTube's a bit mysterious and you don't know
how I am talking to a chat and can't figure out where it is. If you look right below this video, there's a little tag there. It's got a box next to it that says live chat. When you click on that, it will show you the live chat. You do need to have an account to chat. You don't have to chat if you just enjoy listening to the stories. That is completely fine. But of course, it's always nice to hear from people and know what you're enjoying and what your thoughts are and how your days are going. This has been Fireside Fairytales. I'm Rory. This is with Varietal Literature. I have a story this week, but I will say it's a Halloween story. And by say I have a story, I mean I wrote a story. Actually, I wrote 2 things for this week. I put them up on the weekend, but if you missed that because you don't follow our Twitter or Instagram, which is at varietal_lit, it's linked below. The Varietal Literature link. And the 2 things that you can check out is a story called A Odd Place for a Gallery, which is a kind of gruesome story. It's a horror story. And then the second thing I wrote is a choose your own adventure for a haunted house, or a horror house anyways. That's also kind of on the gruesome side. But if you wanted to fiddle around with those things, the choose your own adventure or read the story, I would love to give you that opportunity. The link is down below. And beyond that, on Thursday, we have more live writing, and I'm thinking of doing more Choose Your Own Adventures. Maybe not this Thursday, because I don't think I could get something together that quick. But I'm thinking at least we'll do one monthly, and we'll see how that works out and if people enjoy that. Beyond that, thank you so much for everybody coming by and hanging around the fire. I really like this part of winter. They call it in traditional cultures in colonial America and so on, they call these the dark months. This is the dark month, and the next month is the darkest month, or the black months, if you will, because of how black things get. I think that lack of light can be a little disheartening, but if we get together and we drink some tea and cocoa together and read some stories as they did in old cabins, and I think we'll get through it together. Beyond that, thank you so much for coming by. It's been great to have you here. Have a good sleep.